Stop right now. Because if you're still breathing, still scrolling, still hopping, then you've already been lied to. They told you the impossible is impossible. They trained you to accept limits that were never real. They handed you a rulebook written by losers and called it reality. Reality isn't what they told you. Reality isn't what they told you. Reality is what breaks weak minds and obeys strong ones. The impossible isn't a wall, it's a filter, and you were never taught how to pass through it. Here's the harsh truth. Nobody puts in classrooms, nobody says out loud, nobody profits from teaching you. Most people don't fail because something is impossible. They fail because their internal frame collapses before the fight even starts. They lose in their head first, then they call it logic. They say that's unrealistic. They say people like us don't do that. They say be reasonable. Reasonable is the language of insignificance. The impossible only exists for people who need permission. And you were trained to need permission. From teachers, from bosses, from society, from trends, from fear. That's the programming. The world doesn't reward obedience anymore. It rewards conquest. And conquest starts with a mindset they don't teach you. Let's get something straight. The world is not fair. The world is not equal. The world does not equal. The world does not care about your intentions. The world is a brutal sorting machine. It sorts men who act from men who hesitate, men who decide from men who doubt, men who impose will for men who adapt to circumstances. And the impossible is simply the line where most people stop walking. Why? Because they were taught to calculate risk instead of commanding outcome. They were taught to be realistic instead of becoming dangerous. Here's the reality nobody wants to admit. Every monumental achievement looked impossible right up until the moment it happened. Before it happened, people mocked it. Before it happened, experts dismissed it. Before it happened, average minds explained why it couldn't be done. Then one man ignored them, not because he was smarter, not because he was luckier, but because he was luckier, but because he refused to outsource belief. That's the mindset. The impossible is not beaten by motivation. Motivation is emotional. Emotion fades. The impossible is beaten by identity. By deciding who you are before results show up. Most people wait for proof before belief. That's backwards. If you need proof to move, you will always move last. The man you're afraid to become, don't wait for certainty. They create certainty through action. They move while confused. They act while afraid. They advance while doubting. Because they understand something most people never will. Clarity comes after commitment, not before. Let me give you an analogy. Life is not a classroom, it's a war zone. And the impossible is enemy territory. Most people stand at the border with binoculars, they analyze, they debate, they argue about probability. Meanwhile, the man who wins crosses the line and adapts under fire. You don't defeat the impossible with planning alone. You defeat it by entering chaos and dominating it. This is why comfortable, educated, overthinking men lose to relentless ones. Relentless beats brilliant when brilliant hesitates. The impossible hates momentum. It feeds on pause. Every time you stop to ask, can I? The impossible grows teeth. Every time you say, I'll wait until I'm ready, the impossible builds walls. Because readiness is a lie sold to keep you still. You are never ready. You become ready by moving. This is the mindset shift they don't teach you. Stop asking what's possible. Start asking what you're willing to endure. Because the size of your endurance defines the size of your outcome. The impossible is not about talent. It's about tolerance. Tolerance for uncertainty. Tolerance for pain. Tolerance for looking stupid. Tolerance for failure without retreat. Most people tap out not because they can't continue, but because continuing hurts their ego. And ego is fragile. The impossible attacks the ego first. It humiliates you. It exposes incompetence. It forces learning under pressure. That's why average men avoid it. Not because it's impossible, but because it's uncomfortable. They want progress without friction, growth without embarrassment, victory without vulnerability. That doesn't exist. Look at biology. Evolution doesn't reward comfort, it rewards adaptation. Under stress, the organism that survives is not the strongest. It's the one that adjusts fastest when conditions change. The impossible is just an environment you haven't adapted to yet. But instead of adapting, most people retreat. They call retreat self-care. They call quitting boundaries. They call fear intuition. No, that's your nervous system protecting a weak identity. The mindset that turns impossible into possible is ruthless self-honesty. You stop lying to yourself about effort, about focus, about sacrifice. You stop pretending you're doing everything you can, because deep down, you know when you're holding back. The impossible doesn't respond to half commitment. It laughs at it. You either step forward fully or you don't step at all. Here's another truth they never teach you. The impossible is not conquered in one dramatic moment. It's conquered in private, in boring repetition, in unseen discipline, in nights where nothing seems to move. That's where most people quit. They expect fireworks. They expect instant transformation. They expect recognition. The impossible offers none of that up front. It offers silence, resistance, and delayed feedback. And that delay is intentional. It filters out the ones who only move when rewarded. If you need applause to continue, you are not built for conquest. The man you're afraid to impossible operate on duty, not dopamine. They don't ask, do I feel like it? They ask, what must be done? That question alone separates civilizations from chaos. Duty builds structure. Structure builds momentum. Momentum bends reality. This is chess, not checkers. The impossible is a grandmaster. It doesn't attack head-on. It pressures you psychologically. It waits for impatience, for distraction, for self-doubt. And the moment you blink, it punishes you. That's why emotional men lose. That's why inconsistent men lose. That's why emotional men lose. That's why inconsistent men lose. That's why men who chase comfort lose. Because the impossible demands consistency under pressure. Not bursts, not motivation, not inspiration, consistency. Day after day, move after move, even when nothing changes, especially when nothing changes. This is where the internal command comes in. You must stop identifying as someone who tries. You must identify as someone who executes. Trying leaves room for retreat. Execution assumes outcome. The moment you say, I'm the kind of person who does this no matter what, the impossible loses leverage because it can't negotiate with identity. Pain becomes irrelevant. Fear becomes noise. Opinions become static. You are no longer asking permission from reality. You are imposing yourself on it. And this is where most people misunderstand confidence. Confidence is not believing you'll win. Confidence is deciding you will not stop. Winning becomes inevitable after that. The impossible doesn't break when you believe. It breaks when you persist longer than expected. That's the secret. Not genius, not luck, not connections. Endurance with direction. Most people underestimate how far they could go if they simply refuse to quit. They quit at the first plateau, at the first rejection, at the first sign that progress isn't linear. But the impossible is never linear. It moves like a war. Advanced, stall, retreat, advance again. And the man who stays in the fight eventually controls the terrain. This is why the mindset they don't teach you is dangerous. Because once you understand this, excuses stop working, victimhood collapses, blame loses power. You realize the impossible was never your enemy. Your hesitation was, your need for certainty was, your attachment to comfort was, your fear of being seen failing was. And once those are gone, something shifts. You stop asking, what if I fail? And start asking, what happens if I don't act? That question is lethal because the answer is always worse. Regret, insignificance, a small life justified with big explanations. The impossible doesn't require you to be special. It requires you to be relentless. And relentless is a choice made daily, not a trait you're born with. You make it when you wake up, when you train tired, when you cork without praise, when you continue without certainty. That's the mindset, not hope, not positivity, not visualization, decision, action, endurance. The impossible is not impressed by talk. It responds only to pressure, and pressure is applied by men who refuse to step back once they've stepped forward. This is where your frame must harden. You stop seeing obstacles as signals to stop. You see them as proof you're on the right path, because easy paths are crowded. Impossible paths are empty for a reason. Most people never walk them long enough to see what's on the other side, and that's where the real rewards are. Not money alone, not status alone, but the unshakable knowledge that you can be placed in chaos and still advance. That knowledge changes how you walk, how you speak, how you decide. You stop being reactive. You become inevitable. And the impossible, it starts to look smaller. Not because it changed, but because you did. So here's the truth. Nobody tells you the impossible was never a wall. It was a mirror, a reflection of your fear, your hesitation, your limits. Once you step forward fully, ruthlessly, without compromise, the mirror cracks. The impossible dissolves. The path that once seemed blocked opens before you. It doesn't happen because the world changed. It happens because you changed. You stop waiting for permission. You stop negotiating with reality. You stop asking for certainty. You decide. You act. You endure. And when you refuse to quit, refuse to retreat, refuse to accept the limits they taught you, you turn the impossible into possible. Not by chance, not by luck, by mindset, by identity, by relentless action under pressure. The choice is yours. Will you stay in the crowd, watching others do what you dreamed of? Or will you step forward, embrace the struggle, and become the man who makes the impossible inevitable? No excuses, no compromise, no retreat. And from that moment forward, the world will have no choice but to respect your presence. Because a man who turns impossible into possible doesn't ask. He commands, he conquers, he leaves the weak behind. Your move,